Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Welcome to today's Wellness Wednesday webinar. Hopefully you've missed us, but we're back now with a webinar every month. And so today's is going to be about how to live a more sustainable lifestyle. Forgive me, I've got two screens. So I'm just going to kind of keep switching from one to the other if it looks like I'm looking around. But yeah, my name's Heidi. I'm a registered associate nutritionist and I work as part of the nutrition and wellbeing team within ESS. So I'm going to be talking you through the webinar today. So the reason that we've chosen to do this topic for this month is because it is World Environment Day in June. It was just a couple of days ago on the 5th, and it's also going to be Clean Air Day as well in June on the 15th. So it seems like a good topic to cover. And I know there's been a lot of interest in this recently, and hopefully it's something that you're all keen to learn more about. So hopefully the webinar should last around 30 minutes or so. So let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to cover a lot of different things. So we're going to cover what we eat, so a lot about our food system, the Eat Well guide, and sustainable diets, because we are the nutrition team after all. So a good chunk of it is going to be all about this, but hopefully that sounds good. We're going to talk about how much we waste as well. So things like food waste, plastics, packaging, and a little bit about recycling as well. Changing the way we shop, so kind of moving on, seeing how can we change things, how can we change our habits, as well as kind of cultivating a green home, so thinking more broadly about our lifestyle, not just when it comes to kind of food. And also investing in our planet, so some things that we may not always think about that much, but it's becoming more and more of a kind of thing that people are considering and thinking, actually, where is my money going? So we'll cover a little bit about that as well. Hopefully that sounds good. So first, I thought it would be really good to cover a bit about our food system. So our food system, it's quite a complicated system, and you may not know loads around it, but it is a complex kind of web of activities, as you can see on this image here. So we've got things like agriculture, manufacturing. So agriculture could be things like rearing animals, it could be fishing, crops, manufacturing, so creating the actual products, processing it ready for the product that we need it to be, packaging, delivery, transport. So is it from the UK? Is it being kind of transported around in a van? Is it being flown in from abroad? All those kinds of things to consider. And also when it comes to our actual consumption as well, how we store food and the waste products as well. So the disposal of food and what ends up happening at that end. So all across that kind of long chain, that system as a whole. So there are kind of different stages of waste at each point really within the food system. So we'll kind of talk through a few of those. So each stage has environmental impacts. So let's have a closer look. So our current food system contributes 18 to 25% of total greenhouse gas emissions in the UK, and 20 to 30% of GHG emissions globally. So it contributes significantly to global warming. So it's a really big factor, and what we eat obviously kind of fuels into the food system, what's being produced, how it's being produced, what's happening there. So that's why a lot of this webinar is going to focus on that today. It's a leading cause of deforestation, biodiversity loss, and soil and water pollution around the world. So not just thinking about the UK. Agriculture and livestock farming are one of the biggest contributors to this. And you might have heard of this, you may not have, but this is because of the emissions it produces. So for example, animals we class as ruminants. They need a lot of land. So things like cows, sheep, they need a lot of land to be reared on. They need a lot of water. It takes a long time for them kind of to be ready to enter the food system. And they produce a lot of gases as well, such as methane, which is one of the key greenhouse gases contributing towards climate change. So there's all different, it's not always the super obvious things at kind of face value. There's all the different things that go into it that a lot of us just may not really know about, and it's understandable that we wouldn't necessarily. overfishing and poor fishing practices. So I'm sure a lot of us have heard about this, that fishing stocks with 85% of fisheries are now fully exploited and or overfished. And it is a big concern at the minute in the UK as well, with our fish stocks being quite vulnerable at the moment. So in terms of that, we know a little bit of background about our food system, but what actually is an environmentally sustainable diet? Because there's a lot of talk about this, so let's have a look at what the definition is. So it is defined as those diets with low environmental impacts which contribute to food and nutrition security and to healthy life for present and future generations. So it's now, but it's also thinking about the future. Sustainable diets are protective and respectful of biodiversity and ecosystems. They're culturally acceptable, accessible, economically fair, and affordable. So, not always things that we might think about to do with sustainable diets, but that is taken into account. It has to be nutritionally adequate, of course, safe and healthy for us, whilst optimizing natural and human resources. So making sure we can continue that it is sustainable for the long term, but also for our health. And that is accessible to the wider community as well, and not just some of us. So in 2016, the Eat Well Guide was updated to incorporate sustainability for the first time. So I'm going to show you the Eat Well Guide on our next slide, but hopefully you will have seen it before. We cover it quite a bit in our webinars. So the Eat Well Guide has been created by Public Health England as essentially a guide, an evidence-based guide that's consistent. So the general public in the UK know what to eat to ensure that they're getting all the nutrients that they need to have a healthy, balanced diet. So it's a visual representation. So have a look. So the Carbon Trust undertook a carbon footprint assessment, so comparing to how people actually eat in the UK, so the reality of the situation, versus the new Eat Well Guide, which was released in 2016, to see how it affected the kind of environmental impacts. So if we were to follow the Eat Well Guide, the overall carbon footprint of our food system would be reduced by almost a third, so really significant impact. Again, there would be about 31% of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, 17% reduction in water use, and a whopping 34% reduction in land use as well. So we'll go through on the next page, why is this? So what exactly have they changed and what have they taken into consideration to make it more sustainable? So this is the Eat Well Guide. So again, hopefully you kind of recognise this as some of the main nutrition guidance within the UK. Some of the stats on here are things that I just mentioned, these key ones at the top. So what changes actually happened and how have they made it more sustainable? So the most notable change is the focus on more plant-based proteins. So can you see in the pink section, which is the protein section of the Eat Well Guide, there's a lot of different things in there. So there is some meat, there is some fish, but it's mainly fish and white meat. There's also things like eggs, nuts, chickpeas, so more plant-based options. So that's one of the biggest changes. And in general, you can see it's quite small writing, but it says below, eat 2 portions of sustainably sourced fish per week. So again, just thinking about where it's come from, and eat less red and processed meat, again, to reduce the environmental impacts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. The dairy section has been reduced by a third. So the blue section used to be a little bit bigger and it's just been cut down because of environmental reasons. And it's not always clear as to why this is, but if you think about what we've talked about with ruminants, with cows, with the land, with the gas produced, that they can have one of the biggest environmental impacts because of that. Dairy obviously mainly comes from cows, so things like milk, cheese, yogurt, it's linked to that. Okay, so that's why, although it's not meat, it still has a big impact. The removal of high fat, salt, sugar foods has been done. So it used to be kind of included within the main Eat Well Guide, but now it's on the side. So just at the bottom, you can see there's kind of like some sauces and snacks and things like that. It's not included because obviously it's not something that we need, but it is part of kind of a realistic diet. So there's going to be a few little things like that in there now and again. There's a new small section on oils and spreads. So if you can see the really small kind of purple coloured section, so it says choose unsaturated oils and use in small amounts. So they're plant-based really oils, so things like vegetable oil, olive oil, or like margarines that again usually are kind of sunflower or olive based. So reducing butter again because that tends to come from cows. Fruit and vegetables and starchy foods, they still remain the biggest section. So you can see the green and the yellow sections. They're the main kind of key parts of our diets that take up the biggest amount. So not only has this kind of revised Eat Well guide got a lot of benefits for the planet, but also for our health as well. So as shown here on the stats, if we all follow this, it could lead to 17.9 million years of healthy life, so an increase of that amount overall in the UK. And this is because a lot of us aren't getting what we need to, but if we were to follow this, we'd be getting more of our fibre a day, we'd be getting more fibre, and we'd be reducing a lot of cases of things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and bowel cancer as a result. Okay, so there's a lot of things to think about there, and that is, let's get this up, predominantly because of these things. So it would lead to a reduction in calories, saturated fat, sugars, and salt, and it would lead to us meeting those recommendations for fibre, our fibre day, and getting all those vitamins and minerals that a lot of us may be missing at the minute because we're not quite following this. So what we eat, we've got a couple more, a little bit more in depth on what we eat, and then we'll kind of move on to the other sections. So again, you can see on here a bit more in depth that you can't see on the Eat Well guide itself. Red meat, it is recommended that we limit this to no more than 70 grams per person per day. So it could look like a couple of portions a week, perhaps, of red meat. So things like pork, beef, lamb. But no more. And it recommends avoiding processed meats. Okay, so processed meats are things like sausages, burgers, could be chicken nuggets, salami, hams, all of those kind of things are kind of things added. There's been a lot of different processing involved there because these are one of the key sources of salt and saturated fat in the diet. So they're yummy sometimes, but they're not really offering us a lot. So it's not essential and they're not ideal for the planet either. So it's recommended to keep an eye on those. Again, plant proteins, we chatted a bit about that, increasing those. Fish, so we are recommended to have 2 portions of fish a week in the UK. This isn't really being met at all. One of those should be oily, so it should be a stronger fish like salmon, mackerel, sardines, that kind of thing, because of the healthy fats. So when thinking about fish, it's important to try and get it from sustainable sources. So I've got a couple of logos on here to show you. So these 2 logos suggest that it should be from a more sustainably sourced kind of fishery. So it'll be from fresh water or farmed fish. So if you can keep an eye out for those, you should be able to see it on the products that you're buying as well. And that will help us to make sure that we're minimising the damage to the ecosystem and to the fish and stocks as well. Again, we chatted a little bit about dairy, so just keeping an eye on the dairy consumption. And if you are kind of moving over to more plant-based forms of dairy, then think about having fortified alternatives because there are certain nutrients that are going to be missing. Because dairy itself, it is a really affordable source of nutrition. There is a lot of goodness in there, so it's really accessible for a lot of people. So with changing, you want to make sure that it's got vitamin D, calcium, iodine, and perhaps some B vitamins in there as well. So just have a look at the label. Most of them are, but there's just a couple that aren't. So you don't want to be missing out on anything there. And again, it's all just things to think about, you know, the cost versus the nutrition. We're all different, and I think we've just got to kind of choose what works for us and our families. So we touched a little bit on the carbs. So yep, so recommending whole grain, potatoes, things like that. Got a few more this side. So in terms of fruit and vegetables, of course, we want to be getting our 5 a day fruit and vegetables. But to make it more sustainable and environmentally friendly, we want to be trying to have seasonal. So having a look at a seasonal calendar, what's in season this month or in this season. So now it's pretty much summer. And we want to have locally produced as well. So if you can keep an eye on just in a supermarket, usually there'll be a little flag, like a British flag. And if you can go for those ones, often they're about the same price, not much more. So going for those can be better. Again, it's better for the environment, but obviously we're putting our money into kind of UK farmers, and which is a great thing as well. So having a think about that. And if you are going to buy, because obviously it happens, we can't, necessarily eat only seasonal things all the time. So if you do need something which is out of season, or maybe it's only grown abroad, like far away, trying to use tinned or frozen is recommended, because it means it's been grown perhaps in conditions in the season, and then it's just been sealed in. So we're not kind of forcing those conditions, which sometimes happens, in farming. We kind of artificially create those conditions, which can be bad for the planet. So, and also in terms of waste. So if it's tinned, if it's frozen, it's less likely to go to waste too. And yeah, we've chatted a little bit about portions, so reducing animal proteins, reducing dairy produce, but really important to say that we're not saying you have to go vegan, we're not saying you have to cut out everything altogether. This really is intended to be realistic and sustainable, and just about making small adjustments here and there. So yeah, choosing different drinks over soft drinks. And again, of course, reducing food waste, which we'll go on to chat a little bit more about as well. So being careful when it comes to fresh fruit and vegetables, because they're one of the biggest sources of food waste in the UK, and making sure that if we do have food waste, because of course it does happen sometimes, that we're disposing of this properly the way that we should. Okay. So let's have a look. So this is, I believe this is the last, this is the last one now about sustainable eating. So I just wanted to show you this because I think it really kind of illustrates the different impact that different foods have, and how they contribute towards greenhouse gas emissions in the UK diet. So you can see that red meat by far is the biggest, and then it's dairy below that, again because of the link of the animals that it comes from. And they've got fish, white meat. So you can see that the more plant-based sources, but also eggs as well, are a lot more environmentally friendly. And I mean, there's loads of things to consider here, and it's not about cutting things out altogether. But I think when you can see it like that, it really kind of hits home and makes you think, oh, like, what am I having? And how can I try and adjust that kind of across the week to make a really big difference? Okay, so how much do we waste? So food waste, it's a really big issue. So about a third of the world's food is thrown away, and about 10 million tonnes of all the food produced is spoiled or wasted in the UK every year. And the majority of this, around 70%, actually occurs in the home. So it is things that, every one of us can have an impact on. So it's thought that this includes 25% of all food purchases, which is crazy to think about. 60% is thought to be avoidable. And the top culprits, some of which we've mentioned already, things like bread, potatoes, fresh fruit and vegetables that's just got to their expiry date, and milk as well. So I think a lot of us don't always think about liquid waste, but especially when it comes to milk, because we now know it's part of dairy and it has quite a big environmental impact. That is a waste, maybe because we're tipping it down the sink instead of the bin. We don't think of it as the same thing, but at the end of the day, it is, the energy and the resources and the land that have gone into producing that, and it's not been used. So that's kind of where that comes from. Okay. So in terms of general waste, waste to landfill is falling each year in the UK, which obviously is really, really good news. So it is reducing, but there's still a really long way to go. So why is landfill an issue? What is the problem with it? So it's a major source of pollution because it contributes towards the greenhouse gas emissions, and global warming as a result. And a lot of the things that end up in landfill could have been used, they could have been recycled. So it's just unnecessary. So we only recycle about 45% of plastics in the UK, and the rest pretty much ends up in landfill, littered in the oceans. And I think that's quite shocking because I think in general we think we're quite good at recycling in the UK, but it just shows that there's, we've got a long way to go. There's a lot more that we could be doing, and we don't want to get complacent with that. I just wanted to show you this graph as well, because again, I think it kind of really hits home how long different materials take to decompose in landfill. So we've got paper, 4 weeks, food, about a year, plastic bags, 50 years, cans, 130, and plastic bottles, 450. And I just added as well, it wasn't on the graph, but I read it online, that glass can take up to 1 million years, which is just crazy to think about. Of course, cans and glass, they can be recycled, so it's not necessarily that they're always bad. But if we don't recycle them and we end up putting them in landfill, then it can be a really, really big issue. Okay, so reducing our waste. So how can we reduce our waste? So single-use waste is a really big issue. So really we want to be avoiding single-use items and essentially plastic packaging and packaging in general as much as we can. So things like water bottles, we want to be using reusable. We don't want to be having to pick those up. If you don't like the taste of tap water, you want to be using things like a filter at home instead, than buying all those plastic bottles in. Things where it comes to hygiene, so it could be things like cleaning your face or removing makeup and stuff like that, using a flannel that you can just wash in the washing machine rather than cotton pads. Again, similar to the bottles, things like reusing, using a reusable coffee cup, because we love our coffee these days, and just thinking about the amount of cups that actually go to waste. Going back a bit old school, so trying to use bars of soap and shampoo rather than buying a big plastic bottle, that can be something that makes a really big difference. And recycling. So recycling in the UK saves over 80 million tonnes of CO2 per year. So that's one of the greenhouse gases. So it has a really big impact. And using the food waste bin is one of the biggest things that we can do. So I know not everybody has one, but they're kind of being rolled out more and more now. Now I've just got one in my area. So making sure we're using that properly can really, really help. And recycling your bathroom items. So although a lot of us recycle, a lot of research shows that we're less likely to recycle our bathroom items. And I think this is because it can be quite tricky to clean out, and we think of them as a different category to the things in the kitchen. So again, it's like trying not to become kind of complacent and thinking, what else can I do? Because there's always more. Make sure you're recycling correctly. So I think this is one of the biggest things, because a lot of the time our recycling, can't think of the word now, but it can be like spoiled because we're putting the wrong things in there, and then it ends up going to waste anyway. More and more things become recyclable all the time. So it's one of the biggest things that I really want you to take away, because it's so easy to just think, I know which things in my, the kitchen or the house are recyclable. But every time you check packaging, honestly, you'll find something different like the next week that is now recyclable, which is great news. So you can recycle a lot of products now at larger stores. So things like bread bags, the film that goes around frozen pizzas, cereal bags, they can all be recycled at larger stores, and that's really growing really quickly. So I'd really recommend always checking bags for that. So when you go to the supermarket, at most supermarkets, there should be like just a big bin where you can put them in. You can't do it curbside, unfortunately, not at the moment anyway. There's becoming more and more recycling schemes. So soft plastics, currently the Co-op launched a soft plastic recycling scheme. So things that wouldn't normally be recyclable. So it could be things like crisp packets, kind of like chocolate bar, wrappers and things like that would just go in the usual bin. That can be taken to the Co-op. And again, I'm sure that'll expand. So it's something to keep an eye out on. And recycling electronics. So I think a lot of the things that we don't necessarily know what to do with, we can end up just putting them in the bin, can't we? Because we kind of want it gone. We want it out of sight, out of mind. But obviously it's going somewhere. But a lot of places now do electronics recycling. Currys and B&Q are some of the main ones where you can just take things in, things like kettles, irons, things like that. So yeah, please have a think about that. Waste not, want not. So sell or give away things on eBay, Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace, or to your local charity shop. It's becoming much more common now that we're all starting to do this. And there's also some really good apps out there. So Olio, you can give away any items. It could even be could be food, could just be anything else. Even things like that are open that you've used a little bit of. Often someone will want to collect that. So it can really save a lot of food waste. Too Good To Go, where organisations are giving away kind of the food that they've got left over to prevent it going in the bin. Farm Drop for sustainable farmers, and Share Waste as well. So you can find local people with compost bins and stuff like that if you've not got that recycling option in your area. And a bit of a different one, but just thinking about mending or fixing items. So um, I think we're all kind of getting back in the habit of that now. We kind of, we used to do that years and years ago, and then we stopped, and now we're getting back to it. Thinking about the quality of items and thinking long term. So, can you repair an item? Can you get a tailor? Can you find, a local expert or handy person that can help you to mend or fix your items rather than just buying something cheap, thinking, well, I'll buy a new one, in a few weeks or a few months. So hopefully that gives you a few things to think about. Changing the way we shop is another big thing. It kind of links to the other slide as well, but I'd say one of the biggest things is buying less, really. So renting or borrowing things where we can be a really good option. So asking local community groups online if anyone's got something that you can borrow or you can pay to borrow, asking neighbours, unsubscribing from promo emails, so all those emails that you get coming in telling you there's a sale, things like that can just make a big difference overall. And I think just in terms of the recycling aspect as well, it's not always about thinking, oh, I'll buy this because it's recyclable. Because at the end of the day, recycling is not perfect, it helps, but using less is always the best thing because then it's not out there in the world. So I'll go on to chat a little bit more about that in a second as well. So again, we touched on this a little bit, buying seasonal produce, thinking about the seasons a bit more, and buying frozen or tinned rather than fresh when we can, so when it's something out of season. Buy more from sustainable sources. So this can be a tricky one sometimes. Buying local or buying British is one of the kind of most accessible ways to do that. So again, looking where it has that flag on different products, especially things like apples, things this time of year, strawberries. Often the cheapest product, the basic product in the supermarket, it will be from Europe or outside of Europe. But if you just go the one up, that's a little bit more, but kind of supermarket own, it's usually British. Sometimes there's a flag on it, sometimes you have to turn it round and look, but it always says on the product. So do check the label. Again, use different apps and research what companies are following more sustainable practices. So I know that's a bit of an extra effort, an extra step. It can take some time and some effort on your part. But if you're really curious, maybe just about certain products, sometimes, when it comes to meat or how animals are reared, a lot of the options that are a bit more kind of kind to animals, RSPCA assured or organic. Again, I know it's not always something that all of us can do or that all of us can afford, but they tend to kind of really shout about what they're doing. So just having a look again on the packaging, and often it will mention what they're doing there. Shopping secondhand, so again, kind of linking to kind of how we're buying things now. A lot more of us are doing this. We're going on eBay, we're going on Vinted, we're trying to get secondhand clothes because it's affordable, but knock-on effect that it's also good for the planet as well. And consider buying refurbished products where you can as well, clothes and electronics. I added this in actually just before I started because I thought it's an important thing to mention that yes, it's important kind of, to think about where you're buying it from and not just kind of throwing things in the bin, but also thinking about trends. So I guess this applies to clothing a lot, but I think it applies to a lot of other products, even in the home as well. There's always trends all the time, and it's easy to get swept up in those trends, but trends go out really quickly. So even when we're just buying shoes, we're buying, something for our home, maybe a decorative thing. think about, am I going to like this in a year or two, or is it just like a really now thing? Again, to save money as well, but definitely to prevent waste, because usually trends won't come back around for a long time. So a lot of those things, they are going to end up in the bin, unfortunately. So what I mentioned at the start, so just reducing packaging. So avoiding plastic packaging where possible, avoiding packaging in general, actually. So a lot, I thought one of the good examples links with this picture is fruit and vegetables. So often, you can buy fruit and vegetables wrapped in plastic, or often there's paper bags. Yes, the paper bag is a better option, but can you just not use it at all? Because at the end of the day, it's still waste. So it's easy to kind of, tell ourselves these things, but if you can just bring your own in so nothing's being wasted, then that's always the best alternative. Okay, so we're on the last couple of slides now. We're going a little bit over about cultivating a green lifestyle. So home. So draft proof and insulate. So make sure you kind of heat staying in to prevent you having to kind of use extra heating, extra energy. Consider the energy ratings of white goods. So things like fridges and freezers in particular, they make up around, I think it's about 7% of our overall energy bill because they're on all the time. So when you're getting these, it's easy to think, oh, I'll buy this one because it might be a couple of £100 cheaper. But sometimes over the years, because it's a product we'll have for a long time, hopefully, you can actually make that money back because of the cost of the energy, if it's an efficient product. So having you think about those. Encouraging nature as much as possible, so avoiding things like astroturf, having like more of a wild area if you have a garden or if you have outdoor space or a balcony, trying to have some friendly kind of flowers on there for bees, things that kind of attract insects and birds. Have a water tank to collect rainwater. So if you do a lot of gardening, ideally you don't want to just be using the hose all the time. So if you can collect the rain, we're always having so much rain here that we might as well make the most of it. And transport. I always feel like this isn't a very popular one because we like our cars in the UK, but practice eco driving. So check tyre pressures because low pressure can increase the fuel consumption. Turn engines off when idle. I think this is one of the biggest things. It really, a lot of fuel gets used up just when run idle, so it's just a habit to get into. And generally, try your best to avoid sharp acceleration and heavy braking, because you're just going at those quick speeds and then having to brake anyway and slow down, and it's just a waste of fuel. And again, that's all going into the air, causing pollution and contributing towards greenhouse gases as well. Again, I just wanted to include this chart on here to give a bit of a demonstration of the emissions from different modes of transport, because I thought it was really interesting. So this is per passenger per kilometre travelled. So you can see on here, we do think of flights as being like a really, really kind of wasteful, high emission form of transport. But if you look at a long haul flight, it's actually lower than a few of the other things. And this is because it's a big flight. So they're bigger planes, there'd be hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, I don't know, maybe thousands of people on there. So the amount of people that are able to travel, when you actually work it out that way, it ends up less. But a car with one passenger, because there's just one person, is actually contributing significantly and more than you might think. Because if we're all just in one car each, it's just so much emissions going into the environment. So buses, just, kind of carpooling, more people in a car, rail, and coach are really, really good options when you can. So generally, sometimes we have to drive, of course, but if you can use public transport, or if you can kind of make a bit of a more conscious option effort and just kind of maybe go a different route so you can pick someone up and things like that, just trying to get in the habit of thinking that way can make a really big difference over time. So this is the last point today, and then we've just got a summary slide. So investing in our planet. So I thought this would be interesting to include because it's not something that a lot of us necessarily think about or that we always hear about, but it's becoming more of a thing. So Have your say. So leave feedback and write reviews about what changes you'd like to see. So if there's a product you're not happy with, it's got so much plastic packaging, or, encourage supermarkets and businesses to make positive changes. So if you're not happy about something, then try and shout about it, try and review an item and say, I'm not going to purchase this until this changes, because it does actually have a big impact and it will change things. And I really like the phrase that we vote with our wallets every day, because where we're putting our money, if we're choosing to buy the vegetables wrapped in plastic rather than the loose ones, then that's what the supermarket are going to push more of, okay? Because we're saying, yep, this is what I want. And money kind of rules everything at the end of the day. So think about that. Think, what are you voting for? What are you supporting every time that you make a purchase, or just choose anything? Energy suppliers. So if you can, use an energy supplier that uses renewable sources of energy. Often it's quite easy to switch over these days, and sometimes you even get a lot of benefits and some money back as well. So here are a couple of examples: Green Energy UK and Octopus Energy. So it's kind of something that we can do just in the background of our lives, and we don't have to put too much effort into it. Once it's done, it's done. And what are you investing in? So take time to look at your investments to see if they align with your values. So certain banks, they don't always support the best courses. So have a little bit of a look into your bank, see if it's a bank that you want to stay with and you want to support. Pension providers, so if you've got pensions, different companies, have a look into them, because often they have a sustainable or an ethical option that you can go for. So you're supporting things that are good for the environment. And stocks and shares as well. So I know kind of investing, is becoming a lot more of a thing these days. And of course, we all need, we need money. We want to make money, but have a think about, what are you funding, and are there some companies in there that maybe don't align with your values? So yeah, please just have a little bit of a think about those. So thanks for sticking with me, those of you that are still here. We've covered a lot today. So just to kind of cover, there's obviously a lot of different things that we can do to live a greener lifestyle. I really hope this has given you, some ideas or some things, even if it's just one thing that you thought, oh, I never thought about that before, that you can do, because it will make a really big difference. We don't have to do absolutely everything, but just making some small changes. Changing how we eat can have a positive impact on the planet and our health. Again, it's not about going vegan, it's not about cutting everything out altogether, it's not about depriving yourself of things, but it's just about trying to think of a realistic change that you can make. Keep informed, so check again. So again, like we said with the recycling, just loads of different things. Things are changing all the time in this area because we're advancing, we're making improvements. So don't stay complacent. Don't think, I've got it mastered. Always just keep checking and make sure. Focus on what you can do, and others will follow your lead, because it's easy to get bunged down. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and think, well, I'm just one person. What difference is it going to make? But it does make a big difference. So just try focus on what you can do. And remember that it is World Environment Day and Clean Air Day this month. World Environment Day just passed, but Clean Air Day is coming up on the 15th. So we've touched on it a little bit here with emissions and a bit about pollution. But if you're interested and you want to know what more you can do, then please have a Google and have a research and see what changes you can make for Clean Air Day. So that's it from me. So thanks so much. I really, again, hope it's been useful. This is recorded, so this will go up on our YouTube channel, We Are ESS. If you'd like it to share it with anybody, then please check it out there. But yeah, thank you, everybody. I really hope that you have a good day, and hopefully I'll see you next month.